In the last part, we talked about how to write a simple decorator function. What I want to do now is talk about how to write more advanced decorators that do things like take additional arguments. And to set that up, what I've got on the screen right now is the code from the previous lesson where I had this logged decorator. Again, what that did is it wrapped a function and injected kind of a logging message as output. And then what you do is you use that on functions, for instance, on this module over on the left. So if you import sample, and then you say something like sample add 2.3, you see that little logging message showing up. Here's the problem that I'm going to pose. What if you wanted to change that logging message? Like you wanted to configure the logging message in some way. I mean, right now, the logging message is kind of hardwired, right? It says you called func name, and I don't have any option to change that. What if I did want to change that though? Like how would I set that up? For example, like what if I wanted to specify like the format of the log message, maybe as part of the decorator? Maybe something like that. How would I go about doing that? Here's the way that you can structure that. And this is going to look a little bit strange when you first see it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to define a different decorator just to distinguish it from the first one. So I'm going to make a decorator called log format where you give me a format string like this. The idea is that that format string is going to be this. This is going to be the configuration of that decorator. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to take all of this code that I wrote earlier, and I'm going to paste it inside this log format function. In fact, I'm going to indent it. Now, keep in mind, this looks really odd of what's happening here, but here is the general thinking about how to write a decorator with arguments. You're going to write an outer function that takes in the input arguments. Okay, I'm taking in an input like this format. Because that is the outer function, that format is going to be available to all of the code that's inside. Like I can actually use that anywhere that's in here. Like on this print, instead of hardwiring that, I could say print format funct equals funct or something. The idea is I'm doing string formatting. The funct here, that's going to match up with this thing that's specifying there. What I'm doing is writing kind of like a normal decorator function, kind of in the middle there. And then what I'm going to do, and this is the kind of the mind-boggling part, is I'm going to return the logged decorator as a result. This looks really, really odd. It's like you have two levels of nested functions. You have like the outer function that takes the argument, and then the inner function is a function that decorates a function. It's really strange. But here's how that would work. If I wanted to use that in my code, what I would do is come over here and say, okay, I want to log format, and then I would say at log format. I would give it my little format message, like calling funct name. Let's do it in all caps, just so we can carefully distinguish what's happening there. So we're doing a log format. I apply that to add, and you're going to find that this little message here is being used as kind of a value inside that decorator. Try that out. So if we import sample, it comes up saying you're logging to add still. If I say sample.add 2.3, now you see like my custom log message being added there. The thing that's really odd about that actually just concerns the whole control flow of how that actually works. Just to see it manually, what is actually happening there is you define a function add xy. And then what happens is Python calls this function log format. Actually, let me import that first. Okay, from log call, import. So what happens is it sort of says decorate is equal to log format, where I put in that custom log message. Okay, so I put in my custom message. The result of doing that is that logged function. Okay, it's like that function came back. And then what's happening is I'm using that to decorate the add function. Again, it's like two levels of function calls. Again, a very kind of mind-boggling part of Python, but that's how you would define a decorator with arguments, is to write this outer function, providing the environment for an inner decorator like that. Now, one of the things that you might look at with that is the problem of specifying this configuration. There's an angle on why it's structured this way, which is kind of interesting. Let's say you had a bunch of functions that all had a custom log message like this. Like, let's say you were applying this to all of your functions. One of the things that you might look at is you would look at that and say, well, man, that's getting very verbose. All of a sudden, it's like, why am I having to repeat the configuration or the log message like that? It turns out that this formulation with the nested function allows you to simplify this code that I've got over on the left. One of the things that you could do is you could say logged is equal to log format, where you provide that configuration once, like that, and then you can reuse the result over and over and over again. It turns out that what you've done in this outer layer is you've just made the function that does the decoration. You've given it the format. Now I'm going to repeatedly use it. That is actually kind of a neat trick. What's going to happen in this new version of sample is that if I import that, all of the functions will now have the same logging message. Get the same code showing up. If I want to change the logging message, I can do it in one place. I can say you are calling, and then it will propagate to all of the functions. It's a very subtle feature about doing decorators with arguments, is that you can do that. One other sort of subtlety about that is it turns out that I could take this code where I had the two different decorator functions, and I could actually get rid of the first one using that same technique. Turns out that a decorator with no arguments is kind of a special case of the other one. So I could kind of reduce it down to kind of something more simple like that. So this is the general approach on writing a decorator with arguments. Again, you're going to have two levels of function calls. The idea, the outer function, is taking in variables or arguments and then making them available to all of the code inside. And so that's what you need to do to define functions like that.